At 9:47 a.m. on June 6, 1944, a date etched in history as D-Day, Lieutenant Thomas Fraser gripped the throttle of his P-51B Mustang, christened Jerry, and soared from his English airfield. His destination: France, a critical piece of the aerial tapestry, safeguarding the Allied troops storming the Normandy beaches. Fraser was a member of the 334th Fighter Squadron, an integral part of the esteemed 4th Fighter Group. Jerry wasn't just any aircraft. It was a formidable war machine draped in olive-drab camouflage, housing 50 caliber machine guns ready to unleash a storm of lead, and powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine capable of unleashing 1490 horsepower. This Mustang represented the pinnacle of American long-range fighter technology. Fraser was not only a skilled pilot, he knew the aircraft intimately. However, destiny had a cruel twist in store. Within hours, his beloved Jerry would be stranded on French soil, under the shadow of the swastika. In a matter of days, a German test pilot would be pushing the Mustang to its limits above the German heartland. This unauthorized evaluation flight would shatter the Luftwaffe's preconceived notions about the aircraft that had been wreaking havoc in the skies over Europe. The trouble began innocently enough at 12,000 feet above northern France. Fraser's squadron was escorting a bomber formation when his Merlin engine began to falter. The oil pressure plummeted, the coolant temperature spiked alarmingly. The very engine that made the Mustang such a deadly weapon was also its Achilles heel. Liquid-cooled, with vulnerable radiators positioned beneath the fuselage, and coolant lines snaking through the airframe, even a minor leak, a pinprick hole inflicted by flak or a stray bullet, could cause catastrophic overheating within minutes. Fraser was faced with a grim reality. He radioed his flight leader, broke formation, and began a desperate descent. He had to find a suitable landing spot before the engine seized completely, turning Jerry into a glider. Below him, the French countryside stretched out like a chessboard of fields and hedgerows, all within German-occupied territory. Enemy soldiers lurked everywhere, but Fraser had no other choice. The engine was dying, each cough and sputter a death knell. Spotting a field that seemed reasonably level, he made his decision. Wheels down, flaps deployed, he coaxed the Mustang in as gently as possible. The wheels kissed the rough grass, and the aircraft rattled to a stop. By some miracle, Jerry was intact. No damage to the airframe, no bent propeller, no broken landing gear, only a silent, useless engine. Fraser clambered out of the cockpit, his heart pounding. He surveyed the deserted French landscape, his senses on high alert. Evading capture was now his only priority. He began walking, hoping to melt into the countryside. But his freedom was short-lived. German troops apprehended him within hours, ending his hopes of rejoining his squadron. Jerry sat forlornly in that field for less than 6 hours before a German recovery team arrived. This wasn't a haphazard operation. It was a meticulously planned procedure executed by specialized salvage units known as Berge Bataillon. Their mission was clear: recover downed Allied aircraft before Allied fighters could strafe them into unusable scrap metal. The team worked with ruthless efficiency. They drained the remaining fuel, disconnected the battery, covered the cockpit to protect the instruments, and posted sentries to guard their prize. As night fell, a heavy truck with a flatbed trailer gingerly backed up to the Mustang. By dawn, Fraser's P-51B was secured on a train, rumbling eastward toward Germany, its final destination: Rechlin, the Luftwaffe's premier aircraft testing facility. Rechlin was nestled approximately 100 kilometers northwest of Berlin, in the secluded expanse of Mecklenburg. Since 1936, this facility had served as Germany's primary hub for aircraft evaluation. Every new German design was subjected to rigorous testing at Rechlin, and every captured enemy aircraft deemed airworthy eventually found its way there. The installation boasted multiple runways, hangars overflowing with experimental aircraft, workshops buzzing with skilled mechanics, and, most importantly, a cadre of test pilots who had flown everything from gliders to the cutting-edge jet fighters then in development. One of those test pilots was Hans Ver Lurch, a 30-year-old with an engineer's mind and a pilot's heart. Lurcher was among Germany's best. Lurcher had earned his wings early, learning to fly gliders as a teenager, obtaining his powered aircraft license in the 1930s, and joining the Luftwaffe at the outbreak of war. But fate had something different in store for him. Lurcher never saw combat. His unparalleled skill made him too valuable as a test pilot. He was assigned to Rechlin, tasked with flying whatever they put in front of him and compiling detailed reports on its performance. By June of 1944, Lurcher had logged flight time in over 120 different aircraft types. German, Italian, captured Soviet fighters, even downed British bombers. He had wrung out Spitfires, Lancasters, P-38s, and P-47s. Lurcher had an uncanny ability to take off in an unfamiliar aircraft without a manual, without a checklist, relying solely on his engineering knowledge and innate pilot instincts. Remarkably, he had never crashed an aircraft in his career. This spotless record was all the more astounding given that he was often flying enemy aircraft without instruction books, without formal training, relying on educated guesses about the control layout and system functionality. When Fraser's Mustang arrived at Rechlin on June 8, Lurcher was instructed to have it flight-ready within 48 hours. This urgency was unusual. Captured aircraft normally languished for weeks while mechanics painstakingly inspected every system, checked for sabotage, repaired any damage, and deciphered the intricacies of its operation. But the Luftwaffe was desperate for intel on the P-51. The Mustang had burst onto the scene over Germany in significant numbers just 6 months prior, in December 1943. Before its arrival, American bombers were escorted by P-38s and P-47s, capable aircraft, but with limited range. The bombers were vulnerable deep inside German territory, and Luftwaffe fighters were decimating them by the score. Then came the Mustang. Suddenly, American bombers had an escort that could accompany them anywhere. Berlin, Munich, even targets deep within Poland. The Mustang boasted an operational range exceeding 900 miles on internal fuel alone, extending to 1,500 miles with the addition of drop tanks. It was fast, achieving speeds of 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Could climb to 42,000 feet. Could maneuver with a Messerschmitt Bf 109 and outdive a Focke-Wulf FW 190. And it packed a formidable punch with its 6.50 caliber machine guns, capable of tearing apart a German fighter in seconds. In a mere 6 months, the Mustang had dramatically reshaped the air war over Europe. German pilots, who had once dominated the skies in 1943, suddenly found themselves on the defensive. Kill ratios that had heavily favored the Luftwaffe were now reversing. And German command was struggling to understand why this particular American fighter was proving so superior to everything else the Allies were fielding. This was why Lurcher was given just 2 days to prepare Fraser's Mustang for flight. They desperately needed answers. The mechanics at Rechlin worked tirelessly around the clock. They pulled the engine, identified and repaired the coolant leak that had forced Fraser's emergency landing, and meticulously inspected every system, every control surface, every fuel line, and every hydraulic connection. They painted the underside and tail a vibrant yellow, the standard color for captured aircraft at Rechlin, to prevent friendly fire incidents from overzealous German anti-aircraft gunners. They applied large black crosses to the wings and fuselage, the unmistakable insignia of the Luftwaffe. They assigned it a German designation code, T9 plus HK. Finally, they filled the fuel tanks with high-octane American fuel salvaged from captured stocks. By the morning of June 10th, the Mustang was ready. Lurcher walked out to the aircraft at 0800 hours. He had absorbed every piece of information the Luftwaffe had compiled on the P-51, intelligence reports from pilots who had engaged them in combat, technical drawings gleaned from downed aircraft, performance estimates based on combat observations. But all of that was second-hand information. Lurcher was about to acquire first-hand data. He was about to determine whether the P-51 Mustang was truly as exceptional as the Americans claimed, or simply another overhyped fighter that looked better on paper than it performed in the air. The pre-flight walk-around inspection consumed 20 minutes. The airframe looked well-constructed, boasting a smooth skin, flush rivets, and clean lines. The wings were remarkably thin, noticeably thinner than those of a Messerschmitt Bf 109 or a Focke-Wulf FW 190. Lurcher recognized the laminar flow airfoil design, a hallmark of aerodynamic efficiency, promising lower drag at high speeds, a testament to clever engineering. The cockpit appeared spacious compared to German fighters. The canopy offered excellent visibility, although not quite as expansive as the bubble canopy models he had seen in intelligence photographs. The controls seemed straightforward: stick, rudder pedals, throttle, mixture control, propeller pitch. The instrument panel was logically organized, although everything was labeled in English and employed American units: airspeed in miles per hour instead of kilometers per hour, altitude in feet instead of meters. Lurcher climbed into the cockpit. The seat conformed comfortably to his frame. The control stick fell naturally to hand. He tested the control surfaces. The ailerons responded smoothly. The elevator followed his inputs precisely. The rudder exhibited good travel. He located the fuel selector, the gear lever, and the flap control. He found the gun switches and double-checked that they were in the off position. The last thing he needed was to inadvertently unleash 4.50 caliber machine guns on the ground at Rechlin. He scanned the engine instruments: oil pressure gauge, oil temperature gauge, coolant temperature gauge, manifold pressure, tachometer, everything an American pilot needed to keep the temperamental Merlin engine alive. Lurcher knew that the Merlin was a high-performance engine, but it was also notoriously finicky. Too much throttle applied too quickly, and it would falter. Too lean on the mixture, and it would overheat. German engines were generally more forgiving. The Daimler-Benz DB605 in the Bf109 could withstand considerable abuse. The BMW 801 in the FW190 was practically indestructible. But the Merlin was a thoroughbred, and thoroughbreds required careful handling. At 0842, Lurcher signaled the ground crew. They pulled the wheel chocks. Lurcher engaged the starter. The Merlin cranked over, caught, and settled into a rough idle. He allowed it to warm up, watching the oil temperature gradually climb. The engine sounded distinctly different from German engines. Higher pitched, smoother, possessing a unique auditory signature. Once the temperatures reached the normal range, Lurcher tested the magnetos. Both checked out perfectly. He advanced the throttle slightly, feeling the aircraft strain against the brakes. He released the brakes and commenced taxiing. The Mustang's tailwheel was not steerable, unlike some German aircraft. Precise maneuvering on the ground required the use of differential braking and rudder control, a technique Lurcher had mastered while flying captured British aircraft. He taxied to the runway, ran through a final check, and gazed down the long concrete strip. No wind, clear sky, perfect conditions for a maiden test flight. He advanced the throttle smoothly, carefully maintaining pressure on the rudder pedals to keep the nose aligned. The Merlin responded instantly. The Mustang accelerated rapidly, faster than a Bf109, faster than most German fighters Lurcher had flown. The tail lifted off the ground at 40 miles per hour. At 90 miles per hour, the aircraft lifted off smoothly. Gear up. The Mustang ascended from Rechlin at a steep angle, the Merlin delivering prodigious power at full throttle. Lurcher leveled off at 5,000 feet and began his evaluation. The first thing that struck him was the lightness of the controls. The stick required minimal force to move. Even a slight input produced an immediate response. The ailerons were exceptionally effective. Lurcher rolled the Mustang to the left, then to the right. The aircraft snapped through the rolls faster than any fighter he had ever flown. In a Bf109, considerable muscle was required to achieve a fast roll rate. In the FW190, the controls became heavy at high speeds. But the Mustang rolled effortlessly, almost too easily. Lurcher had to exercise caution to avoid over-controlling the aircraft. He checked the rudder. Responsive, but not overly sensitive. The elevator was light, yet effective. The Mustang exhibited stability in pitch, showing no tendency to pitch up or down on its own. He attempted a loop. The aircraft executed the maneuver cleanly, displaying no inclination to stall or buffet, accelerating smoothly throughout. He tried a barrel roll. Perfect. He initiated a climbing turn, pulling 4G forces. The Mustang remained smooth, displaying no shaking or any signs of an impending stall. Lurcher pushed the throttle to full power and accelerated in level flight. 160 mph, 200 mph, 250 mph. 300 miles per hour. The Mustang continued to accelerate relentlessly. At 320 miles per hour, he leveled off and noted the Merlin's manifold pressure and RPM. The engine was running smoothly, temperatures remaining within normal parameters. He realized he had even more power available if needed. German intelligence had estimated the Mustang's top speed at 410 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Lurcher wanted to verify this himself. He climbed to 23,000 feet, leveled off, and pushed the throttle to maximum continuous power. The Mustang accelerated 360 mph, 380 mph, 400 mph, 410 mph, 416 miles per hour at 23,000 feet. German estimates had been close, but slightly conservative. The Mustang was even faster than intelligence had predicted. Lurcher reduced power and experimented with different configurations. Flaps down, gear down, simulating a landing approach. The Mustang decelerated smoothly, displaying no undesirable handling characteristics. Gear up, flaps up, back to high-speed flight. He proceeded to test the stall characteristics, starting with a clean configuration. Power off, nose up, gradually reducing airspeed. The Mustang provided ample warning before the stall occurred. The controls became mushy, the aircraft started to buffet, and then the nose dropped gently. No wing drop, no snap roll, just a docile stall that was easily recoverable. He repeated the test in the landing configuration: gear down, flaps down, power off. The result was the same. Ample warning, gentle brake, easy recovery. He then tested the stall characteristics with power on, simulating a combat turn. At full throttle, the Mustang would stall even in a sharp turn if pulled too aggressively. However, it provided clear warning through increased stick force and buffeting. Lurcher observed that the P-51 was actually easier to fly near the stall than most German fighters. The Bf-109 would abruptly snap into a spin if stalled during a turn. The FW-190 would violently drop a wing. The Mustang simply mushed, giving the pilot time to recognize the impending stall and recover smoothly by relaxing the back pressure. This was a crucial advantage in combat. A fighter that could be flown aggressively without endangering the pilot was an incredibly deadly weapon. Lurcher spent an hour subjecting the Mustang to every conceivable maneuver: vertical climbs, split S-turns, chandelles, Immelman turns, scissors maneuvers. The aircraft responded instantly to every input. It never exhibited any unexpected behavior. It never tried to kill him. When he landed back at Rechlin at 10:15, the ground crew was waiting, eager to hear his impressions. Lurcher shut down the Merlin, clambered out of the cockpit, and uttered 5 words that would appear in his official report the following day. "It is a truly unique aircraft." Over the next 2 days, Lurcher flew Fraser's Mustang 4 more times. He tested its high-altitude performance, reaching 36,000 feet. He tested its dive performance, pushing past 450 miles per hour in a steep dive. He assessed its fuel consumption, endurance, engine handling, and control response at varying speeds and altitudes. He compared the Mustang's performance to the latest German fighters, the Bf-109G-10 and the FW-190D-9. His conclusion was unequivocal. Only those 2 German aircraft could match the Mustang in combat, and even then they were not clearly superior. The Mustang was fast at all altitudes, climbed rapidly, turned tightly, dove like a rocket, and possessed enough fuel to remain in the thick of the fight for hours. Lurcher also noted the Mustang's weaknesses. The engine was sensitive to rough handling. The fuel system exhibited instability issues. If the internal fuselage tank was filled to a certain level, the aircraft would stall at full throttle if pulled into an excessively sharp turn. But these were minor drawbacks compared to its overall performance. Lurcher's report was meticulously typed up, classified, and disseminated to Luftwaffe command. One copy was specifically routed to fighter units defending Germany. The message was clear: the P-51 Mustang was the best Allied fighter in the sky. Do not underestimate it. Do not assume your Messerschmitt or Focke-Wulf is automatically superior. The Mustang could beat you in a turning fight, outrun you in level flight, and dive away from you if things turned sour. The only advantages German fighters possessed were superior armament and more experienced pilots. German 20mm and 30mm cannons delivered a heavier punch than the American 50 caliber machine guns. But by mid-1944, experienced German pilots were being killed at a rate that far outstripped the Luftwaffe's ability to replace them. The Americans were not the only ones who noticed something unusual was happening. German fighter pilots began receiving briefings about the Mustang's capabilities, information that contradicted what they had been previously led to believe. At JG-1, a fighter wing tasked with defending northern Germany, pilots assembled in a briefing room to witness a demonstration. Outside on the airfield, several captured Allied aircraft had been assembled: P-38s, P-47s, a Spitfire, and the Mustang bearing German markings. The unit responsible for touring these airfields was known as the Wanderzirkus Rosarius, the Rosarius Traveling Circus, named after Hauptmann Theodor Rosarius, who commanded the second staff of the Versuchsverband Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, the experimental unit of the Luftwaffe High Command. Rosarius's mission was to familiarize German pilots with Allied aircraft, enabling them to understand their opponent's strengths and weaknesses. The briefing officer stood before the assembled pilots and spoke deliberately. "You have been told that the Bf-109 and the FW-190 are superior to American fighters. In some respects, this is true, but the P-51 Mustang is different. You will see it demonstrated today. Pay close attention to its roll rate, its acceleration, its turning performance. It is faster than you expect, can turn tighter than you have been taught, and it has the range to follow you home if you attempt to disengage." Some of the pilots shifted uneasily. They had already engaged Mustangs in combat. They knew what the briefing officer was saying was accurate, but officially acknowledging it was something else entirely. After the briefing, the pilots filed out to the flight line. The Mustang, bearing the T9 markings, was parked adjacent to a Bf-109 and a FW-190. German pilots clambered into the cockpits, examining the controls, scrutinizing the gun sight, and assessing the stick response. Then, the demonstration flight commenced. 2 German pilots took off in the Bf-109 and the FW-190. A third pilot, an experienced test pilot from Rosarius's unit, took off in the Mustang. The 3 aircraft climbed to 10,000 feet, circled the airfield, and initiated a simulated dogfight. The pilots on the ground watched intently. They observed the Mustang shadowing the Bf-109 through tight turns. They saw it roll faster than the FW-190. They witnessed it accelerate away from both German fighters in level flight. They saw it climb at the same rate, dive faster, and maneuver with assurance. When the 3 aircraft landed, the German pilots who had been observing were unusually quiet. That demonstration succinctly encapsulated the predicament the Luftwaffe faced. For years, German pilots had been told their aircraft were the best in the world. In 1940, 1941, and 1942, that was largely true. But by 1944, the Americans had caught up and, in some cases, they had surged ahead. The Mustang was irrefutable proof. German pilots, who had spent 3 years dominating the air war, suddenly found themselves reacting to American initiative. American pilots referred to it as energy fighting. The Mustang possessed so much power and such exceptional acceleration that it could dictate the terms of engagement. If a Mustang pilot wanted to engage, he could close the distance and force a fight. If he wanted to disengage, he could dive away or outrun his opponent in level flight. That psychological shift was as significant as the technical performance. By August of 1944, Lurcher's report on Fraser's Mustang had been widely distributed throughout the Luftwaffe. Fighter units received copies. Training squadrons received copies. Engineering teams received copies. The report was detailed, technical, and brutally honest. It did not sugarcoat the Mustang's performance. It did not assert German superiority out of propagandistic necessity. It simply presented the unvarnished facts. The P-51 Mustang was an excellent fighter aircraft, possessed exceptional range. It exhibited high speed at all altitudes. It demonstrated good maneuverability, carried effective armament, and, most importantly, it was being produced in massive quantities. The Americans could afford to lose Mustangs and replace them within weeks. Germany could not afford to lose experienced pilots. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe was depleting its reserves of experienced pilots faster than its training schools could produce replacements. Young pilots with as little as 50 hours of flight time were being thrust into combat against American pilots with 200 hours of training and 50 combat missions. The outcome was tragically predictable. German pilots died. American pilots racked up kills. One of the most striking examples of this disparity occurred in March of 1945. By then, the war was drawing to a close. Germany was being overrun from the east by Soviet forces and from the west by American and British forces. The Luftwaffe was a mere shadow of its former self. Most of its experienced pilots were either dead or captured. The majority of its aircraft had been destroyed on the ground by strafing attacks. Fuel was so scarce that many of the remaining aircraft were grounded. In early March 1945, American intelligence officers began interrogating captured German pilots. They sought to understand the Germans' perceptions of American aircraft. 22 captured Luftwaffe pilots, many of whom were seasoned aces, were interviewed. The interrogations were compiled into a classified document titled Air Intelligence Weekly Summary, dated March 23, 1945. The section titled Allied Fighters as Germans See Them contained detailed opinions from men who had fought against P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s. The findings were unambiguous. The captured German pilots rated the P-51 Mustang as the best fighter in the American arsenal. They admired its speed, range, and agility. Some admitted they would only attempt to outrun it if they had a substantial head start. Others confessed that only the most skilled German pilots dared to engage a Mustang in a turning fight because its agility was so difficult to counter. One experienced pilot was quoted as saying that the American .50 caliber machine guns were highly effective against fighters, especially because they offered a high volume of fire with deadly accuracy. The Luftwaffe had invested 2 years in developing tactics to defeat American bombers and fighters. Those tactics had proven effective against the P-38 and the P-47, but they were less successful against the Mustang. The Mustang was simply too fast, too maneuverable, and possessed too much endurance. By the time these interrogations were conducted, the outcome of the air war was no longer in doubt. The Luftwaffe had been decisively defeated. Allied air forces held complete control of the skies over Germany. German pilots who managed to take off faced overwhelming odds. 5-1, 10-1, sometimes even 20-1. And many of those Allied fighters were Mustangs. Hans Ver Lurch survived the war. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, he was captured by American forces. They recognized his value as a test pilot and his extensive knowledge of German aircraft development. He was interrogated extensively about the aircraft he had flown and the reports he had authored. The Americans were particularly interested in Lurch's assessment of their aircraft, especially the P-51. Lurch told them the truth. The Mustang was one of the best aircraft he had ever flown. It possessed a combination of speed, range, and maneuverability that few fighters could match. It was well-engineered, well-built, and deadly in combat. The Americans diligently took notes. After the war, Lurch returned to civilian life in Germany. He worked as an engineer and occasionally served as a test pilot for German aviation companies. In 1980, he published a book titled Luftwaffe Test Pilot, Flying Captured Allied Aircraft of World War II. The book was based on his wartime logbooks and included detailed descriptions of every aircraft he had flown. The chapter on the P-51 Mustang was one of the longest. Lurch described Fraser's aircraft in detail, recounted the test flights at Rechlin, and provided his candid assessment of its performance. He never regarded the P-51 as merely an enemy aircraft. To Lurch, it was simply a well-designed machine. As both an engineer and a pilot, he appreciated good design regardless of its country of origin. Lurch died in 1994 at the age of approximately 80. His book remains one of the most comprehensive accounts of Luftwaffe aircraft testing during World War II. Lieutenant Thomas Fraser, the pilot who was forced to land that Mustang in northern France, spent the remainder of the war as a prisoner in Germany. He was captured on June 6, 1944, the very same day the Allies landed in Normandy. He was liberated in May 1945 by advancing American forces and returned to the United States that summer. He remained unaware of the fate of his aircraft until years later, when researchers pieced together the story through German records. Fraser finally learned that his P-51, the one he had affectionately nicknamed Jerry, had been tested by one of Germany's premier pilots. The captured P-51 was no stranger to the Luftwaffe. The famed Rosaria Circus, a unit dedicated to evaluating captured Allied aircraft, had flown it extensively, demonstrating its capabilities at various Luftwaffe bases. German pilots, eager to understand the Mustang's strengths, had used it to hone their skills in simulated combat, desperately seeking a way to counter its dominance. This particular aircraft, designated T9+HK, was lost on December 10, 1944, a testament to the brutal attrition of the air war. Fraser's service record merely stated that he lost an aircraft due to mechanical failure over enemy territory on June 6, 1944. It didn't begin to hint at the plane's subsequent, unintended role as a crucial source of intelligence for the Luftwaffe concerning the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang wasn't just another airplane. It irrevocably altered the aerial landscape of Europe, transcending simple metrics of speed and maneuverability. It wasn't simply that it was fast, maneuverable, or possessed an unprecedented range. It was the synthesis of all these qualities into a single, deadly package. Furthermore, it was produced in staggering numbers. Over 15,000 Mustangs roared off the assembly lines during the war, a testament to American industrial might. It was a reliable workhorse, capable of penetrating deep into enemy territory and returning unscathed, mission after mission. It was adaptable, equally adept at escorting lumbering bombers, strafing ground targets with deadly accuracy, and engaging in close-quarters dogfights with the best the Luftwaffe could muster. And crucially, it arrived at precisely the moment the Allies desperately needed it. The Mustang's genesis only amplified its remarkable success story. In 1940, North American Aviation designed and built the prototype in a mere 102 days, an almost unbelievable feat of engineering. The British, initially seeking to license-produce P-40 Warhawks, were instead presented with a bold proposal by James Kindleberger, the visionary president of North American Aviation. He suggested designing an entirely new fighter from the ground up, spearheaded by chief designer Edgar Schmud. The British, seeing the potential, agreed. The first prototype, dubbed the NA-73X, took to the skies on October 26, 1940, a mere 149 days after the contract was signed. This development timeline was unprecedented in aviation history. Most fighter aircraft took years of painstaking design, rigorous testing, and gradual refinement before entering production. North American achieved the impossible in less than 5 months. However, the early Mustangs were not without their flaws. They were powered by Allison engines, which delivered impressive performance at lower altitudes, but suffered a significant power drop above 15,000 feet. While the aircraft was undeniably fast at sea level, exceeding 400 miles per hour in some trials, its performance at 20,000 feet, the typical altitude for aerial combat over Europe, was significantly hampered, barely reaching 350 miles per hour. This limitation rendered it unsuitable for long-range bomber escort duties. The Royal Air Force initially employed these early Mustangs for low-level reconnaissance and ground attack missions. American forces deployed Allison-powered Mustangs to the North African and China-Burma India theaters, where combat operations were generally conducted at lower altitudes. Then, in late 1942, a pivotal idea emerged that would forever alter the Mustang's destiny. Ronald Harker, a test pilot at Rolls-Royce, proposed the audacious notion of fitting a Mustang with a Merlin 61 engine. The Merlin, renowned for its 2-stage supercharger, was capable of maintaining consistent power at high altitudes. Rolls-Royce engineers installed Merlin engines in 5 test Mustangs. The results were nothing short of revolutionary. The Merlin-powered Mustang could now achieve speeds exceeding 430 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. It could climb to an astonishing 40,000 feet. It retained the exceptional range and low-drag characteristics of the original design, but now possessed high-altitude performance that rivaled, and in some cases, surpassed, every fighter aircraft in the world. An American military attaché stationed in London, a man named Thomas Hitchcock, witnessed these groundbreaking tests and immediately recognized their significance. A veteran fighter pilot from World War I, having been shot down and captured by the Germans before staging a daring escape from a prisoner of war camp, Hitchcock was not only an experienced aviator but also a man who understood how to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of military bureaucracy. He immediately dispatched a report to Washington, emphasizing that the Merlin Mustang was precisely the long-range escort fighter America desperately needed to sustain the bombing campaign against Germany. The Army Air Forces swiftly authorized North American to commence production of Merlin-powered Mustangs. The Packard Motor Company in Detroit, already producing Merlin engines under license from Rolls-Royce, was tasked with supplying the necessary power plants. North American installed these Packard-built Merlins into Mustang airframes, creating the iconic P-51B model. Production began in earnest in mid-1943. By December of that year, the first Merlin Mustangs were arriving in England. The 354th Fighter Group, equipped with the P-51B, began escort missions over Germany in December 1943. Within weeks, it became unequivocally clear that the Mustang had changed the very nature of the air war. American bomber formations, which had been suffering catastrophic losses of 8 to 10% per mission, suddenly saw their losses plummet to a more sustainable 3 to 4%. German fighters, which had been attacking bomber formations with relative impunity, now faced long-range escorts that could relentlessly pursue them back to their own airfields. Luftwaffe pilots, who had dominated German airspace for the preceding 4 years, suddenly found themselves on the defensive, constantly looking over their shoulders. The P-51D model, which entered service in mid-1944, represented a further refinement of the Mustang's already formidable capabilities. It boasted a bubble canopy that provided the pilot with unparalleled 360-degree visibility. It was armed with 6 .50-caliber machine guns, an upgrade from the 4 on earlier models. It featured improved ammunition feed systems that significantly reduced the risk of jamming. It had provisions for mounting rockets or bombs under the wings for ground attack missions. And it incorporated additional internal fuel capacity that extended its already impressive range. The P-51D, equipped with drop tanks, could fly 1,700 miles, remain in combat for a full 30 minutes, and return to base with fuel to spare. No other single-engine fighter in World War II could match that level of endurance. The strategic impact of the Mustang was enormous. Prior to its arrival, American daylight bombing raids were constrained to targets within the range of shorter-legged escort fighters. This limited the targets to those located in France, Belgium, and Western Germany. Berlin, the vital industrial centers located in central Germany, and the critical oil refineries in Poland were beyond reach. German factories could be strategically relocated eastward, beyond the protective umbrella of American escorts, and continue producing aircraft and weapons with relative impunity. But with the advent of the Mustang, nowhere in Germany was truly safe. Bombers could strike targets anywhere within the Reich, confident in the unwavering protection of their Mustang escorts. German industrial capacity, which had been dispersed to mitigate the effects of bombing, was suddenly vulnerable once again. Oil refineries, aircraft factories, ball-bearing plants, chemical works, and transportation hubs all fell within the reach of American bombers, shielded by the deadly Mustangs. In late 1943 and early 1944, the Allied bombing campaign against Germany was teetering on the brink of collapse, suffering unacceptable losses. Bombers were being shot down by the hundreds. Aircrews were dying in horrifying numbers. The entire campaign was in danger of being suspended. Then the Mustang arrived in force. Suddenly, bombers had reliable protection all the way to Berlin and back. Suddenly, German fighters could no longer attack bomber formations without facing swarms of tenacious American escorts. Suddenly, Luftwaffe pilots who dared to intercept bombers found themselves being relentlessly hunted by Mustangs lurking high above the formations, waiting to pounce. The entire dynamic of the air war shifted dramatically. In February 1944, General Jimmy Doolittle, the legendary aviator, made a bold decision that irrevocably altered American fighter tactics. Doolittle had just assumed command of the 8th Air Force in England. Prior to his arrival, American fighters were rigidly instructed to remain in close proximity to the bomber formations at all times. If enemy fighters attacked, American fighters would engage them, drive them away, and then immediately return to their close escort duties. This inherently defensive tactic, while intended to protect the bombers, inadvertently allowed German fighters to escape and regroup for subsequent attacks. Doolittle changed the rules of engagement. He ordered his fighter pilots to aggressively pursue German fighters, wherever they went. If enemy aircraft were spotted, American fighters were to pursue them relentlessly, shoot them down, and even destroy them on the ground if the opportunity presented itself. The overarching goal was no longer merely to protect the bombers. It was to completely annihilate the Luftwaffe. This tactical shift, coupled with the Mustang's long range and superior performance, proved devastating to German fighter forces. American pilots could now hunt German fighters across the entirety of Germany. If a Luftwaffe pilot took off to intercept bombers, Mustangs would chase him relentlessly. If he attempted to land, Mustangs would follow him to his airfield and shoot him down during his landing approach. If he somehow managed to land safely, Mustangs would strafe his aircraft on the ground, destroying it before it could take to the skies again. German pilots grimly referred to this tactic as freie jagged free hunting. American pilots, with their characteristic bravado, called it fighter sweeps. Regardless of the moniker, it was brutally effective. One particularly compelling example of this occurred in January 1944. Major James Howard, piloting a P-51B with the 356th Fighter Squadron of the 354th Fighter Group, was escorting B-17 bombers to a target near Ostersleben in Germany. During the mission, Howard's squadron became separated from the bombers. He found himself alone, facing a formation of 60 B-17s under intense attack by approximately 30 German fighters. Instead of retreating, Howard, with extraordinary courage and skill, fearlessly attacked. For a harrowing 30 minutes, he fought single-handedly against a swarm of German fighters. He shot down several aircraft, damaged others, and effectively drove the remainder away from the vulnerable bombers. Even when his guns jammed, he continued to make simulated attacks to deter the German fighters from pressing their assault. Not a single bomber from that group was lost. Howard was awarded the Medal of Honor, the only fighter pilot in the European theater to receive that distinguished decoration. His actions on January 11, 1944, demonstrated the astonishing capabilities of a single Mustang pilot, armed with skill, determination, and a superior aircraft. But Howard's success was not simply a tale of individual heroism. It was made possible because he was flying an aircraft that could stay with the bombers for hours, could engage in high-altitude combat, could outmaneuver German fighters, and had sufficient ammunition to engage multiple targets. No other fighter in early 1944 could have accomplished what Howard achieved that day. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was demonstrably losing the air war. During Big Week, a concentrated bombing campaign launched in February 1944, Mustang pilots decimated a significant portion of Germany's experienced fighter pilots in intense air-to-air combat. These losses weren't just of aircraft. They represented the irreplaceable loss of trained, experienced pilots, killed or captured, pilots who could never be adequately replaced. Germany was still capable of producing large numbers of fighter aircraft. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fw-190s were rolling off the production lines by the hundreds. But Germany simply could not train pilots quickly enough to fill the empty cockpits. By late 1944, many German pilots had less than 100 hours of total flight time when they entered combat. Some tragically had as little as 50 hours. American pilots, in stark contrast, typically had over 200 hours of training before being deployed to Europe, and many veteran pilots had flown 50 or more combat missions. The experience gap was staggering. An inexperienced German pilot, even in a good aircraft, stood little chance against an experienced American pilot flying an excellent aircraft. The outcome was tragically predictable. German pilots died in alarming numbers. Kill ratios that had favored the Luftwaffe early in the war were completely reversed. By 1945, American pilots were achieving kill ratios of 5-to-1, 10-to-1, and sometimes even higher, and the P-51 Mustang was responsible for more of those kills than any other Allied fighter. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was a spent force, decisively defeated, and the P-51 Mustang played a more significant role in that defeat than any other Allied fighter. Reich Marshal Hermann Göring, the commander of the Luftwaffe, was interviewed after Germany's surrender. American intelligence officers asked him when he knew Germany had lost the war. In a widely attributed quote, Göring's answer was direct and unequivocal. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." That statement encapsulated the strategic impact of the P-51. When long-range American fighters could penetrate the very heart of Germany, when they could escort bombers anywhere and relentlessly hunt German fighters everywhere, the Luftwaffe could no longer effectively defend German airspace. And without control of the air, Germany could not possibly win the war. What the Germans discovered when they meticulously tested Fraser's captured Mustang was not a secret weakness they could exploit. It was the stark confirmation of what they already suspected, the truth they had been desperately trying to deny. The P-51 was everything American pilots claimed it was, and more. It was fast. It was agile. Possessed incredible range. Could be flown aggressively without overwhelming the pilot. It was heavily armed. And the Americans had thousands of them. German engineers could meticulously study the Laminar flow wing, the highly efficient cooling system, and the Packard Merlin engine. They could painstakingly measure its performance, meticulously calculate its drag coefficient, and thoroughly analyze its control system. But they could not build enough aircraft to match American production. They could not train enough pilots to replace their mounting combat losses. They could not produce enough fuel to keep their remaining fighters in the air. By the time Luftwaffe test pilot Lurch flew Fraser's captured Mustang at Rechlin, Germany had already irretrievably lost the air war. The test flight merely confirmed what the German high command already knew in their hearts. The Americans had a fighter that could go anywhere, do anything, and decisively win the battle. And there was absolutely nothing the Luftwaffe could do to stop it. That is the true essence of technological superiority in warfare. It's not about propaganda claims or inflated performance figures. It's about engineering excellence that translates into measurable, tangible results. The P-51 Mustang was not perfect. It had its weaknesses. The liquid-cooled engine was susceptible to battle damage. The fuel system exhibited instability when the fuselage tank was full. The controls demanded careful handling at high speeds. But its unparalleled combination of speed, range, maneuverability, and reliability made it the most effective long-range fighter of World War II. Even German test pilots who flew it begrudgingly came to that conclusion. Even German intelligence officers who meticulously analyzed it, however reluctantly, admitted its undeniable superiority. And when the war finally drew to a close, the Mustang's combat record spoke volumes. P-51 pilots destroyed nearly 5,000 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. They escorted bombers deep into the heart of Germany and brought them home safely. They dominated the skies over Europe in the final year of the war. Not solely because American pilots were always better trained, although many were. Not solely because American tactics were always superior, although they often were. But because they flew an aircraft that gave them every possible advantage. An aircraft that empowered them to achieve the impossible. The Germans learned that lesson the hard way. By testing captured P-51s, by flying them in mock combat, and by exhaustively analyzing their performance. And what they learned was that, sometimes the other side builds something you simply cannot beat, something you can only respect, something that fundamentally changes the outcome of the war. The P-51 Mustang was that aircraft, and even its enemies knew it in their hearts.